Hi again and welcome to part 2 of the Liven MEGA Synthesis tutorial. Part 1 covered the pattern edit mode or regular mode, which showed you how to make your own tracks. Part 2 will cover the FM edit mode to show you how to make your own sounds. So we'll be talking about the overlay that came with the device that you can pop on to give you access to all the FM editing parameters. In this tutorial I'll try to break down FM synthesis into its basics to give you a good grounding in the way it works without getting too involved in the really advanced stuff, and then in future tutorials I'll talk about some advanced techniques. So I've selected a blank pattern, I'm going to press function and FM edit down here, and that immediately takes us into a sound selection mode. So we need to put the overlay on, and we're using the functions that are written down here. So we can use the octave up and down buttons to preview the sound, we can change the legacy mode from here, we can exit back to the pattern edit mode, we can select a sound and then press OK, which take us into edit mode. We can choose our bank from here. We can also export and rename a bank. So if we scroll through using the bank buttons, we can see the different banks that we saw from the pattern edit mode. So I'm just going to go backwards past uso onto bank 32, and 23 to 32 will be empty when you get the unit. So I'm going to select FM sound 1 and then press OK, and then we're in edit mode. So this button's lit up, and then we're now using the functions written above these buttons here. So let's just have a quick look at some of the common terminology used when talking about FM. A basic building block of FM synthesis is called an operator. An operator contains a tone generator that produces a waveform called a sine. As you can see from the graph, it's a really smooth waveform. It's producing a single peak on our spectrogram. FM synthesizers contain multiple operators, and when we route these together, we can create brighter waveforms. As you can see on this example, there are more peaks on our spectrogram. These are called harmonics. So the more harmonics we add, the brighter the sound. The MEGA Synthesis contains 4 operators, and these can be arranged in 8 different configurations called algorithms, as shown on the right here. Each of these blocks on the diagram numbered 1 to 4 is our 4 different operators. Anytime we have an operator that's connected directly to the output, we can hear it. That's called a carrier. And anytime we have an operator that's not audible but is affecting the other operators, we call that a modulator. As you can see on the left of this diagram, operator 4 is acting as our carrier, and all the other 3 are modulators. All the operators are the same apart from operator 1, which has the ability to connect into itself. As you can also see on this diagram, we call this feedback. Each operator not only contains a tone generator, but something called an envelope generator. This enables us to change the output level of the operator over time. When you change the output level of a carrier, this changes the volume. When we change the output level of a modulator, we change the amount of harmonics that we showed earlier. This can also be referred to as changing the tone or the timbre. So now we know a little bit about FM synthesis, let's have a look at the layout of the controls here. So everything in the pink sections is per operator. And you choose the operators down here, so 1 to 4. So if I've got this 1 lit and I change the attack, that's changing the attack rate of operator 1. If I select operator 3 and move this, I'm changing the attack rate of operator 3, etc. And the same is true here. So these are all per operator as well, but we change these by clicking on them and then changing the value knob to either switch them on and off or change their level. Everything in the white sections is global and is saved per patch. So obviously we've only got one algorithm we can choose, we've got a single amp LFO, and we've got an overall sound level. That's saved within the patch. All the other controls, such as velocity, the voice mode, voice adjust, they're just so you can demo what the sound will sound like. They're not actually saved in the patch. So I've just made a quick patch up, which is nice and bright, so that we can hear how the envelope works. Because there's a couple of unusual things about the envelope in the MEGA Synthesis. For one thing, we've got a 5-stage envelope. A normal ADSR would have an attack stage, so that would fade in, and a decay stage would fade down to wherever our sustain level is, and it would stay there and hold until we release the key, and then the note decays at the rate of the release. But we've got an extra stage here, and that's a sustain rate. So once the envelope hits the sustain level, it will start to fade down to 0 depending on the rate set here by the sustain rate. But there's another unusual thing here in that our rate controls are going to seem backwards compared to most synthesizers. It was like this on early FM synthesizers, and it actually makes sense when you think about it, because these are rate controls. So with our rate set to our top, we're going to get an instant attack. And as we turn that down to the middle, we're going to get a slower attack. until we get near the bottom when we've got a really slow attack. And the same is true of the decay rate, sustain rate, and release rate. So they're all going to feel the wrong way around, but you'll soon get used to it. The sustain level is the same as any other envelope in that turning it to the top will sustain at a higher level. So let's turn that sustain level down to somewhere around the middle. So normally you'd expect this note to hang at a sort of middle volume until you release the key. But what's going to happen is it's going to decay. That's because of this control. So like we said, the sustain rate will reduce the sound to 0 over time. So if we change this to the top, it's going to decay really, really quickly once this rate is over. If we turn that to the bottom, it's going to act like a normal ADSR envelope. So anytime you want a normal ADSR response, all you've got to do is turn this knob down to 0. So now it will stay at that 63 that we set here. So that will just hold indefinitely. So the decay knob determines how long it takes to fade from the top of the envelope to the sustain level. So this is an instant decay. And then as we turn this down, we can hear longer and longer decays. And then the release rate is kind of self-explanatory. When we release our finger, this determines how long it takes for the note to decay to 0. So an instant release would sound like this. And as we turn that down, we get nice long tails. So let's just reinitialize our sound. We can do that anytime by pressing the Initialize button, which is here. And that takes us back to the default preset FM sound, which is this. So we've got algorithm 1 selected, which puts all the operators in a chain, and they're all modulating each other. So it's creating quite a bright sound. And then we've got that decay that we talked about earlier because of the setting of the sustain rate. Let's hear them all individually. We can do that by selecting algorithm 8, which is here. And that puts them all into carrier mode. So they're all producing the same sine wave. We can quickly mute different operators by holding the edit button and pressing them. So 4, 3, and 2 are now muted, so we're just hearing operator 1. So that's going to sound a bit quieter because you haven't got so much stuff stacked on top of each other. I just want to demonstrate that feedback control. So operator 1 can be sent back into itself, and that's just going to create a bright waveform on operator 1. The closer this goes to the top, the more like a saw it's going to sound. So we get a nice bright sound at the top. I'm just going to turn that sustain rate down to 0 and the sustain level up like we talked about. Which is going to get a nice sustaining bright sound. One thing to be aware of is that it's also affected by its own level. So the more we turn up operator 1, the more it's going to feed back into itself. And it'll go past saw and start turning into noise. So if we adjust that here, again, if we turn it down, it's going to make it sound less bright. But the more we get towards the top, right at the top, we're into a very loud noise. This is something we can use to create noise within our patches. So I'm just going to reinitialize again. From here again, I'm going to go into algorithm 8. I'm just going to temporarily mute operators 4, 3, and 2. So we've just got 1 selected. So if we change the multiplier frequency, we can hear that changes the pitch of the overall sound in multiples, which is the expected behavior. That's because this is a carrier, but if you were to change the multiplier frequency of a modulator, the effect would be vastly different, and that's something we'll cover in detail a bit later. We can also detune the operator from here, but that'll have a very subtle effect at the moment, to the point where you won't be able to tell the difference. That's something that's more obvious when we're using much brighter sounds. So I think a good way to learn FM synthesis is just to stick to 2 operators to begin with. I'm just going to unmute all these. I'm going to turn off completely operators 3 and 4 by turning their level down because the mutes aren't saved. And then I'm going to change to algorithm 5. So that's this one here. So we're just going to use half of algorithm 5, just 2 operators. So operator 1 is a modulator and operator 2 is a carrier. So that just gets us that. If we change the output level of operator 2, we're just going to change the overall volume without changing the tone. And if we change the output level of operator 1, we're going to change the tone without changing the level. So I'm just going to change the envelope on both of these, like we did earlier, with a high sustain and a low sustain rate, so we'll just get a sustained tone. Which is not a bad place to start from each time, so I'm just going to save that down by pressing OK and OK again. And that's saved us into slot 1, so we can record that patch as we try different things out. So I'm just going to add a bit of feedback, which will make operator 1 brighter. And then as we change operator 1 over time, that's going to change the tone over time. So if I lower the rate so it fades in, change the decay so it drops down a bit slower, lower the sustain level. So our tonal change follows the envelope. So let's just change that back up again. So we've got an instant attack, put that sustain level up. I'm just going to lengthen the release of this so that the tone stays consistent as the sound decays. And then go to operator 2. And we can change the volume from here. So this is a carrier, so anything we do to the envelope will change the volume over time. So that's the basic principles of FM synthesis. Changing the carrier will change the volume, changing the modulator will change the tone. So I've reset back to that sustained patch we created. Up until now, both operators have been set to the same frequency, so each of them has a setting of 1. Changing these relative to each other also has a massive effect on the sound. So let's turn up that feedback a little bit again. So we're going to get a brighter sound. This is basically producing a saw-like sound. If we were to change the multiplier up to 2, we're getting square wave-like sounds. As we can see on the graph, a ratio of 1 to 1 has all the harmonics filled in. Whereas a ratio of 2 to 1 is missing every other harmonic. And then there are a huge amount of different flavours of sound we can get just by adjusting these multipliers. Sometimes in counterintuitive ways. So we can try also changing the pitch of operator 2. Creates an almost like high pass filter kind of effect. So let's make some more adjustments to our pitch. Let's change the fine frequency of operator 1. So we don't have to just stick to integers of 1, 2, etc. We can change it by a decimal place. So you can get some really dissonant sounds. And then if we go to multiples of like a quarter and a half, start to lock back into something that sounds a bit more tonal until we wrap back round to an integer. So I'm going to drop back down to 1. We can also switch it to fixed mode. So if you press the fixed button and turn that on, this will mean operator 1 no longer tracks pitch. And if we use our multiplier, we can change its frequency and adjust it with the value knob. This is really useful for percussive effects where your drum sounds don't track to pitch, so you can create kick drums and snares and hi-hats and stuff that just operate on a fixed pitch. So just reset to that sustained tone again. So let's have a look at the amp LFO. There's a single amp LFO for the whole patch, but we can turn it on and off per operator. By default, it's on for all of them. So if we just turn up the sensitivity, we can hear the effect. And then we've got a rate setting here too. So I'm just going to leave it at the bottom for now. Let's go to operator 1. Amp LFO on and off is set from here. So we can tap it just to switch it on and off. On for a carrier. That's just going to create a tremolo-like effect. So that's just the volume going up and down. If we change it for the modulator, that's kind of a wah effect. It's like a kind of a filter LFO, with brighter sounds being more affected. There's another way we can do a similar thing, and that is with the SSEG. So this sets the envelopes into a looping mode. This can be done per operator as well, and it depends on the attack and decay time as to what effect this is going to have. So let's switch it on for operator 1. We've got lots of different shapes that we can choose from. Let's just stick to that one for now. Bring that sustain level down. And as you can hear, that's just started looping the envelope. So it loops while it's held, and we've got lots of different shapes to choose from. Again, if it's on a modulator, it'll affect the tone, and if it's on a carrier, it'll affect the volume. We can also change how much velocity affects our tone. So again, let's turn the brightness up, get a nice bright tone, and we can change the velocity sensitivity for operator 1, for example. At the moment it's set to maximum, so they all are. So I'll just change operator 2 down to nothing. So now operator 1 is set to max and operator 2 is set to minimum. So the volume won't be affected by our velocity, but the tone will. This is something that becomes really useful when you've got an external MIDI keyboard connected that has velocity sensitivity, so you can get some really expressive playing. Again, if we were to set operator 2, our carrier, to be velocity sensitive, that would change the volume depending on how hard we play our keys, and we can mix and match and have as much on each operator as we want. Just going back to what we were talking about detuning earlier on, if we detune these two operators away from each other, we're going to get a bit of movement in our sound. So can you hear that subtly starting to kick in if I turn this the other way? It's a good way to get a little bit of movement in our sound for things like pads and stuff. Just one or two things to tidy up then. We haven't talked about the sweep yet. This is a preview, like I say, of the pitch LFO that you can get from the pattern edit mode. So capable of going very, very fast or doing subtle movement or a bit of vibrato. We have our legacy mode here. We can switch between the ladder and filter options just to test what the sound will sound like. Voice mode, we can choose mono, legato or poly with a voice adjust here. So if we're in mono or legato mode, we can change the glide. We have a copy setting here. So if we want to copy in a patch for editing into a different slot, we press this. And then we can choose one of the other sounds, and that will import that sound into this preset so we can edit it. We can export our sound from here. This sends it via MIDI sysx onto a computer, and we can rename it too. So when we press rename, the octave buttons will shift the cursor around and we can change the letters using the value knob. We can also set an overall sound level. So once we've created our patch, if we don't think it's quite loud enough, we don't have to mess around with the operators. We can go into the sound level and we can make an adjustment from here too. So just a few patch management things. So we're in edit mode. Anytime we press OK and OK again, that's going to save those changes down to the preset we selected when we entered edit mode. If we want to change one of the presets, we can do that. So if I go to Uso's bank and select Uso's acoustic piano, I can make some changes here. But if I press save, that's going to save over that preset that came shipped on the device. So you probably don't want to do that. You can do if you want to, but there's a better way. So if I go back to bank 32, pick sound number 2, which is going to be just one of the blank presets, press OK. And then we can use that copy function that I mentioned earlier. So copy's here, we press copy, and then we're using the bank buttons down here. So we can go between banks. So I can select Uso's bank, pick that acoustic piano and press OK. And that's brought that preset from bank 1, sound 1 into bank 32, sound 2. So now we're making edits here. We've got the acoustic piano. And we can save that without worrying about overwriting the preset. So that's now saved that to here. So that's a blank preset, and that's Uso's piano. So we can make adjustments from there. So that's the best practice. Another thing we can do, if we go into one of the sounds, either one of the presets or one of the blank presets, and we make a change. So we do something and we decide, oh, actually I don't like that. We can press cancel, which is here, the clear button. And that just backs us out to the sound selection level without making any saves. So those edits will no longer be present. So this preset has gone back to that without being that horrible harsh noise I just made. So I think that about covers all the settings. So that should hopefully give you a bit of a grounding in FM, and it explained all the controls to you. Like I said, there will be more advanced tutorials. I'll start drilling into making specific sounds. But for now, just have some fun with the things we talked about, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope you enjoy making your own sounds on the Liven MEGA Synthesis. Cheers.